I'm pleading, I'm begging for help with the gray area, because right now I feel like I have two choices. I can sit stagnant and not approach girls at all and not talk to them at all, or I can say, hi, my name is Travis, I really like you, can we make out or can we go on a date? Mm-hmm. And I feel paralyzed with talking to girls.
Yeah.
And so I'm pleading for replacement behaviors.
So yeah, dude, October 18th, you reached out to me after watching the Peter video, I believe. We talked on the phone. I'm super excited to learn about your story. I want to primarily just listen today and start there. I'm here for any, like, if you have any questions for me, of course. But I'm really excited to learn about your story, and we'll see afterwards, you know, how we'll put it together. Put that all in your hands like I do everybody else on the final say of what goes out there.
Okay.
So yeah, go for it.
Okay.
What's your story?
Yeah, I actually was diagnosed with Asperger's in 2007, and I was 22 years old. And, you know, even though, as you know, I don't have that diagnosis anymore because it doesn't exist. So I was diagnosed with Asperger's in 2007, and my diagnosis was what really led to it was after, you know, I was growing up in elementary school, was kind of challenging in this. I had some sensory issues, with more fine motor skills issues, like holding the pencil, things like that. But really, things didn't get complicated until middle school. And you know, you'll understand it's that social change. The social rules change. No longer is playtime like running around on the playground or chasing girls, like just chasing after them. Yeah. Now it's like talking and conversation, and then all of a sudden you add in nonverbal communication, body language, things like that. And so, but the other thing, routine changes. So you go from one teacher all day long to 7 or 8 teachers, those types of things. And so adjusting to the learning environment was difficult. But again, no diagnosis until 22, so I mainstream all the way. And I noticed, like, in elementary school, I was a straight A student, all A's. Middle school, it was like B's, C's, and high school was like C's and D's. And what had happened for me was the more interested I became in the social aspect of life, the less interested I became in doing my homework. Okay. And so I was one of those kids that would, you know how you get, like, teacher gives you like 5 minutes at the end of class to kind of like start your homework. So I was basically like BSing my homework, you know, at the end of class, just to try and get it done so I didn't have to take it home, because I was more focused on, I wanted to socialize and things like that, or learn how to socialize. And so, I mean, obviously at the time, I didn't know why I needed to learn how to socialize. So I didn't have the diagnosis, so I didn't know. And then as I got into high school, I went through late bloomer with puberty. But once I started to like girls is really when the diagnosis kind of like blew up in my face. Okay. And that's really a testament to, you know, people will tell you, like, it's a very complex issue. People will tell you that dating is like you just be friends first, and then a friend turns into a date, and it's true. But there's a little bit of a game to it, and there's some nuances to it. And so, like, oftentimes, you know, as I go through life, I get advice and counseling, you know, just be yourself or just be who you are. And the issue with that is that, like, you know, like I said, I'm a fan of Peter. I can recite Peter's videos pretty well. But, like, he talks a lot about made-up name John, his favorite character. So, like, he tells a story about how the guy is step 1, step 787. Hi, I'm John. Can I feel your breast? Can I feel your feet? Mm-hmm. Like, and it goes through all those steps, or misses all those steps. So what the issue with that is, and that's exactly, I think, my issue, is that I skip the steps, and I'm very black and white. There's no gray area. And one of the frustrating parts about not having the gray area is, I think, and I don't know if you would agree or disagree, but I feel like the gray areas are kind of where the most beautiful part of life lies, sometimes within the gray areas. Yeah. So I feel like it's either like, hi, I'm Travis, I like you, or it's just like, hi, I'm Travis, and I don't know what else to say. Yeah. So there's no, when you go from step 1 to step 787, what you need is like replacements to just add to the layers to build that relationship. And so as I got older, as soon as I started throwing myself at girls like that, obviously coming on too strong is the issue. Mm-hmm. And so girls were saying, dude, you're creepy nice. You know, because I was the guy who was like, if you don't socially know how to get someone's attention, you think of things like, my go-to has always been dozen roses, dozen roses. So that's how you get a girl to know that you like her, is a dozen roses. The issue at hand with that, and let me preference this by saying one of the most frustrating parts I feel like about Asperger's for me is I'm very good and very schooled technically on knowing this stuff, but when it comes to being able to apply it to like self-reinforcing my own behavior, that's extremely challenging. So I'll get in the situation, get into the context of the moment, and I'll be like, I know I shouldn't send her a dozen roses, but I don't know what else to do, so here's a dozen roses, you know? And it's just like acting on that without being able to process. And, you know, so I go through that process where I'm coming on too strong, and girls say you're creepy nice, so I know there's something wrong. And I reach out to a counselor on campus. I go to counseling. You know, it took a couple months. He did some testing, and eventually referred to a psychiatrist who diagnosed with Asperger's. And that's where the journey really began. It kind of took off with Asperger's. And so immediately I knew, okay, at the time, and it's very important that we talk about, there are a lot of things. One of the biggest let's talk about the fundamental issues with like support services for people with DD. And DD is obviously developmental disability is a very broad term, especially when it comes to autism. It's a very wide spectrum. And one of the biggest challenges I feel like is like with waiver systems, we're pulling from the same funding source in the same system for someone who's nonverbal and very low executive functioning skills as we are for someone who's higher functioning like me, and we're trying to design programming from the same policies. And I think that creates some fundamental issues with making it, when you talk a lot about natural environment teaching, you know, like it kind of, if you can't even teach to the person's functioning level, and again, I talk about levels, I don't like functioning labels, because a lot of people think, you know, if you're very verbal like me, you're super high functioning, and if you're nonverbal, you're low functioning. And the reality is there's people that are nonverbal who function really high. And so that's very important. And so, you know, I did all this stuff. I started reading, the first book I read was The Complete Guide to Asperger's by Tony Atwood, and then started researching, and, you know, I did what you're supposed to do. You're like, oh, you should apply for the Family Supports waiver. And I did that, and I'll never forget my experience, and I'm still on the waiver. I'll never forget my experience. The lady from the disability office came to my house and like started asking all these questions, right? And she's like, well, how well do you do laundry? How well do you do dishes? How well do you take a shower? Like, how well, like all these questions that you would want to ask someone who's like lower functioning. But so like the problem, I'm like, honestly, dude, I'm looking at her like blue in the face, like, why are you asking me these questions? So I'll never forget, the story is one of the first support staff experiences I ever had was they met me and I was like 26, and they're like, well, let's go to the restaurant, let's go to McDonald's, and we're gonna make sure you know how to order your food at the McDonald's at the counter. And so it's really what had happened was everything about the design of the services, we talk a lot in ABA about generalizing and applying. And so you've got someone who's functioning up here and maybe more concerned with like social thinking type of skills. But now, just to qualify for services, immediately we're asking them to generalize and apply down and become lower functioning. Like the lady actually told me I needed to lie on the test if I wanted the waiver, and that type of thing. And so one of the dangers of that for me, I think what had happened was you spend 8-10 years in the waiver, and you're generalizing down and applying, and it creates. Like when you spend so much time having to assume the identity of being lower functioning when you're higher functioning, I wonder if sometimes it doesn't, like the higher functioning skills you do have, maybe kind of you lose some of those because you're spending so much time trying to, basically it also kind of like creates like a personality disorder in a sense, because you're like, you're trying to be someone just to make your staff happy, or you're, you know, like they want to do things like, like one time they wanted to make a grocery list and help me find things in the store at Walmart, and things like that. And so not only that, but then you're going to counseling, and you know your counselors, you know, it's very important with Asperger's that a counselor has a solid foundation of understanding of Asperger's, because we do know, and there's a lot of research out there, that CBT, people with Asperger's might respond differently to CBT than neurotypicals, and so you have to be very careful, because like one of the things that was happening was I was getting told over and over again that I should do ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. Now, one of the quick things that I learned growing in my 20s was that we talk about reinforcement. Girls thought I was creepy, but two things happen. The good girls will run away from you and not pay any attention to you at all if you're creepy or creepy nice. But there are some girls who will be like, oh, okay, but it's okay to be creepy if you pay me or if you buy me things or if you basically long story short, I learned that the only way with my social setup, with my social skills, the only way to have a girlfriend was to be a sugar daddy, that type of thing. And so, we'll get into, I can talk about it a little bit more later, but you develop this belief that the only way you can love someone is if you're paying someone like $500 to go to dinner with you. And then someone with autism, obviously we're going to fixate on issues. And so it blew up into this huge ordeal in my head to where I'm like, well, if I want to go to dinner with her one night, that's $500. But if I want to be married to her 7 nights a week, that's $3,500 in a week. You need, and I don't know about you, but I'm not making that kind of money.
I'm not making
And so I think one of the things that I really like to talk about is a lot of times people with autism, we think that the behavior is because of autism. So we think that this child's hitting me simply because he's autistic. But in reality, I think the behavior part of it is more the contingency that the person's dealing with because they are autistic. Mm-hmm. And so like for me, I function pretty well. Like I do pretty well on my own. Like literally, like just being truthful, the only issue I've ever had with Asperger syndrome is the girl issue. And so, with me, it's tough because all the services are really, like they will flat out tell you that, like I've actually been told by the state numerous times that social skills coaching is not medically necessary. And so the problem is you're wanting help with like social thinking and how to relate to people and stuff like that. But the system is focused on executive functioning. And my argument is that, in my opinion, social thinking should be considered an executive functioning skill. And there are people that you'll run into, like, it's hard to, like, not a lot of insurance pays for a lot of things like Michelle Garcia Winter is doing, or, things like that. And so it's like, how do you support someone who has a social disorder that is primarily a nonverbal communication issue? And there are numerous studies. I've seen several studies, but some say nonverbal communication is 50%. Some go as far as saying it's as much as 93% and 7% verbal. So if you look at what was happening, I was really struggling with the 93%. And verbally, like I was doing pretty well at the 7%. But they were throwing the services at me from the 7% standpoint of you have to be able to talk and you have to be able to communicate and you have to be able to executively function. Yeah. But they were ignoring the 93%. And when you talk about like person-centered planning, I just don't feel like, and I've always been an advocate of this, like it's not with like, we haven't necessarily using the best use of taxpayer money if you're not understanding that this person needs social thinking instead of executive functioning. Yeah. So you would get into situations where, I had a job coach, I had vocational rehab, and I'd be working at like Wendy's because they're really big on like, they like to place you in like fast food. It's easy, it's simple, and it's that type of thing. But so you get into Wendy's and I would be wanting help, like people would have drive-through headsets and people would joke around and talk on the drive-through headsets. And, people talk a lot about like, some people are really big on talking about like sexual innuendos or whatever, those types of things. And as an Aspie here, I'm sitting here, I'm hearing that stuff, but people are like expecting me to participate. And like, I don't know how to respond. And I don't know what to do. Yeah. So like, I'm on the phone, job coach. How do we understand this sexual innuendo? Yeah. And as you can probably figure out, job coaches aren't trained to, to intervene on that level. So what happens is I ended up like, basically I went to work every day. I'm like, what do I need to pretend to not know how to do so I can use my job coach? So like one time it was like, I got to tell my job coach, I don't know how to tie a trash bag, or I don't know how to like use this cash register when like I really know how to. So I spent a lot of time in services like pretending to be lower functioning than what I am.
And quick question, is that right? Yeah. Was that because it was hard to engage in those social things, like how they were joking on the headsets? Like you just didn't know how to do that, so it's kind of like a way to escape that? Well,
it's also a way of, I spent so much time like, and people will tell you that I spent so much time asking for help with like the social thing, that I was denied. Like I have like several letters from Medicaid basically saying that social skills coaching is not medically necessary. Yeah. And basically it was like, okay, well, I don't understand, but if you want me to be lower functioning, then I guess I will, be lower functioning. Like I thought that was what I was supposed to do, to use my job coach, or to that type of thing.
Okay.
And and what really, this was in 2011. What really took off for me, I don't know how well if you know Carl Sundberg. Yeah. So he had at his center, he's really good at like he will like contract out with other consultants and bring consultants in. Yeah. And I love Pat McGeevy and
nice.
Peter. He brought Peter in, and I heard Peter speak at the center, and obviously that was one of the first talks I heard on like puberty and sexuality, and really about issues that were related to me. Like when I watched Peter's presentation, I feel like I'm watching a story about my life. Like he really tells, like in one of his videos, he talks about, how there's a guy who's got a really good job, but he gets paid every 2 weeks. And every Friday he goes to the bar and he buys everyone drinks because he's the coolest person in the bar for that night. But for the next 2 weeks, he's broke. Yeah. And I think sometimes we don't understand. Again, that's a social skills issue. Like if you're doing that because you're desperate, because you don't know how to connect. And so like he talks about like it's really like it's really challenging to change that behavior because it's a learned behavior. Yeah. But for me, it's not. It doesn't seem like it would be so challenging to change that behavior if there wasn't roadblocks in the way. Mm-hmm. Because if you were to take a staff, a BCBA, and go out to the bar with him and help him facilitate social interaction and socialize, then he's not going to be buying all these people. If you were to actually work in the context, natural environment teaching, work on some of those issues, then maybe he's not going to be buying people all those drinks and stuff like that. And so like one of the biggest things is we don't necessarily always, I feel like we kind of put limitations on what functioning level of things we can work at. And as a behavior analyst, I wonder, like, just a disclosure, I'm not a behavior analyst. I've taken the 40-hour RBT training online just for fun. Okay. I've not done checkoffs, or I've not done, supervision or anything. But as a behavior analyst, I would have to feel like one of the most frustrating parts would be dealing with the insurance company in the behavior plan. Because like there's gonna be things that I would wanna do with the client that I'd be like, we need to work on this. But I don't think there shouldn't be that third party telling, like you shouldn't have someone who's not a behavior analyst telling a behavior analyst what they can work on and what they can't work on. Yeah. Because like, what do they know? Like, how do they know about,
I agree with you there. I think part of the issue comes down to that those funds, since they're public funds, they're afraid they're going to be mismanaged, right? So it's kind of out of this fear of those sort of things.
No, I totally understand that now more so than I did. I had a hard time like understanding that, and my self-advocacy skills haven't always been the greatest.
And just to clarify, I don't think that's. I wasn't saying that as like that's acceptable. I'm not saying I agree with that system, right?
Absolutely.
I don't know if I know what the better system looks like on like a national level, but I agree with you. Like I don't think it's. I had a graduate. When I was an undergraduate, I had a professor that would give me feedback sometimes on papers that said NQR, not quite right. Right. And it was one of those things to try to stimulate me to think about like what maybe was off. They weren't necessarily giving you the answer. They made you kind of critically think and figure it out. And so when I think about that system, it's like, it's not quite right? Right. There's some things that are off, but I don't necessarily know what the solution is.
Yeah, and it's a tough solution. It's a very challenging solution, especially if you're doing it in the context of you want to provide person-centered planning. Because you can't just say, well, this is autism, so we're going to do this, this, and this. You've got to look at the person and be like, and one of my biggest beefs with the policy, with the system is you write your behavior plan, you send it off to someone sitting in an office somewhere who's never even met the client, never even met the person with autism. And so I feel like even if they're not necessarily trained in, behavior analysis, or even if they don't know about autism, even at all, assume they don't know about autism at all. Yeah. If you're making an important decision like that, I feel like you should at least meet the kid that you're making the decision about.
Right. If I can ask you a question real quick, if you could wave a wand, and kind of fix some of that, it sounds like that's one step. Is there other things you think that would be really, nice to see?
I'm really big on not behavior analysis. As you know, Skinner wasn't just I didn't design this I didn't know the rats were autistic. I didn't design behavior analysis for autism. It's a people thing. It's a human behavior. Anything that breathes, we're observing behavior. And so I think I think a lot about in terms of generalizing and applying. And I really think that you can apply that to various areas of life. But if you were to if you were to meet the person, and instead of sitting in an office somewhere in Indianapolis or Washington, D.C. and writing policies, if you met the person and interviewed, like, say, a group of people with autism, and then you found out what their needs were, and then you came back to the drawing board, came back to the office, and you wrote the policies based off of that. So what I like to think of, for me, Ryan, it's easier to, I call it generalizing down instead of generalizing up. And so, like, for me, it's easier to start, like, believe it or not, like, I think it's about meeting the person at the level they're at. I feel like it's easier for me to start with a higher functioning social skill and then work down and learn lower functioning social skills.
Okay.
And with that, I think if you take the person, meet the person, if you were to meet me and take me where I'm at, well, how do we generalize down a little bit to come up with a solid plan that's not necessarily too low for him, but peer, as opposed to sitting in the office and saying, we're writing this plan for, like, someone who's nonverbal. Now, how do we generalize up to someone who's Asperger syndrome and apply it to their life? So I think generalizing is a big thing to do with it. And not just sitting there and saying, we talk a lot about...
Which, it sounds like that's something the behavior analyst could
absolutely
approach differently, right? Like that's, rather than like the insurance agencies and stuff, like that could be the behavior analyst that approaches that way, right?
Yeah, and the other thing is, I think it's tough because I think that not everyone, even in the field, not everyone is comfortable with things like dealing with dating and puberty and sexuality. And so I've gotten a lot of feedback from some behavior analysts that, well, it would be unethical for us to teach you how to talk to girls, like that type of thing. And I really believe in my heart that behavior analysis is probably one of the better ways to learn how to socialize and talk to girls and, that type of thing. So I think I don't know if, like, behavior analysts are, like, I'm not sure exactly, like, what they're afraid of in going there. But I mean, I'm sure part of it is, like, the funding issue. Like, how do you get reimbursed for teaching someone how to flirt, like that type of thing.
I talked to another behavior analyst here this week, and she's an expert in that area of sexuality. Right. One of 3, I think, that has a BCBA plus a credential in sexuality. And I believe one of the first that did both of that. But there's the kind of tone was, I'll send it to you, make sure you see it. Right. But the tone essentially was, from my understanding, is that behavior analysts aren't sure what to do with that. Like, we're not explicitly trained to work in certain domains necessarily. Right. Sometimes in your supervision requirements, like, you experience certain things. But that's not like a design. Like, we're not. Our field's not designed to teach a certain set of standards of areas to practice in. And that's one that seems to be really neglecting. Yes, where we could use some assistance in. And I wonder if that's what it is. It's just. So I know some analysts like myself, like, I wouldn't feel equipped to work on that. I don't know. I would not call it unethical myself, but yeah, okay.
And I think, so what had happened for me is I saw Peter present at Baca in Indianapolis, or Fishers. And at the same time, I was using some of my college financial aid money. I had found these social skills coaches. It was called Miss Pivot. And it was basically, like, I don't know if you've heard of, like, Art of the Charm or anything like that, but, like, social skills coaching, like, kind of like dating coaching. Okay. And so I had found this thing. And for me, Miss Pivot was a, like, perfect storm of literally, like, I was learning about Peter Gerhardt at the same time, and I was obviously studying social thinking, and I was reading Michelle's books. And I would go out with Miss Pivot. And it was literally a combination of, like, they were talking about, like, social context. How do you, like, understand and interpret the context of the situation that you're in? And they were also talking about, like, social thinking. And so, like, working with these social skills coaches, for me, it was, like, the perfect storm of, like, I literally felt like I had Peter and Michelle, like, standing next to me when we went out and we worked on social skills. Now, so obviously that felt good. I was learning social skills. And so I email the people at Medicaid, and I'm like, you have to check this out. You have to do this. And they're thinking, like, dating coaching, we're not paying for that, that type of thing. And so that's been one of my biggest challenges, is getting the skills, working on the skills because I got to tell you, and I'll be honest with you, and in any services that I've had that has been government funded services, I've never actually went out and approached anyone to start a conversation with paid staff. But with the social skills coaches, that's all we did was we went to the mall. We approached, people that worked at the mall. We approached people, and we just like started talking to people. And they would be like, "Well, this is how you should, how do you hold your hands? How do you like?" They were doing reprogramming the social skills. Okay. And in services, now I'll have counselors tell me like the best advice I've ever gotten from a counselor was, "Well, you just go up and say hi to someone," like that type of thing, because they don't know, they don't get it.
Quick question here, because we were talking about funding mechanisms and stuff a little bit. The what were you calling it? The one where you'd go out and they'd teach you how to do things.
Miss Pivot. Yeah.
Miss Pivot. Yeah. So this things like Miss Pivot, was that under the same funding structure, or was that something that had to be paid separately out of pocket?
Honestly, I was desperate, and I was in college, and I basically took the Stafford loan and gave it to them, to go out and do stuff like that. So that
I used some of my student loans to get books, a lot of books that I didn't necessarily need for classes, but absolutely. Not the same, but so but when you're desperate, you're like, and truthfully, I was already, obviously I was 21, 22 before diagnosis. I knew it was a social issue. Yeah. So I was already Googling social skills coaching, and one of the things I do feel like is worthy of talking about and very important is if we fail to support people that are on the spectrum and talking to girls, for example, or building romantic relationships, they're going to seek out their own information, and that's not always going to be the best case scenario. Yeah. I'm sure you've heard of pickup artists and those types of things. Mm-hmm. And so one day in 2007, I Google, how do I get a girlfriend? And I get all these people popping up that pay me $5,000 for the weekend, and I'll teach you everything you need to know about talking to girls. And what had happened is at the time I was already, I'd already developed the concept where I turned 21, and people at school started going out to the bar. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to go out on Friday and Saturday nights, like everyone else. So Peter tells a story about how when he was younger, he didn't go out to the bar before 10 o'clock at night, but now that he's older, he has to be home and in bed by 10 o'clock at night. So your priorities, change as you get older. Yeah. And so for me, I wanted to go out at midnight on Friday and Saturday night with everyone else and dance with girls at the bar. And that was my interest. I wanted to dance with girls at the bar. And so I quickly learned, I went to that environment, and I quickly learned that you can get a little bit of positive reinforcement from a girl if you buy a drink. And unfortunately, that just I didn't have the supports. And without the supports, that escalated into just being completely authentic with you. Yeah. It escalated into you can feel my breast if you buy me breast implants. And it just kept getting bigger. And I think girls can tell when someone's gullible and desperate. And sometimes some girls, not every girl, the good girls will just run away from you if you're creepy or come on too strong. But there are girls who will magnify onto that and take advantage of that situation. And so I developed this. It was obviously a learned behavior where if you give a girl money, she will give you positive reinforcement in terms of talking to you or whatever that is. And so I developed this mindset to where I didn't believe that I could go out to dinner with a girl unless I had $500 to give her to go to dinner with me. Yeah. And so I'm doing that, and the frustrating part about that, I mentioned a little bit about it turned into, I'll never be able to get married and have kids unless I have $500 per day to give to a girl to marry me. And before you know it, that's $3,500 per week. Yeah. So they're placing me in all these jobs, but I'm having trouble with motivation because I'm making nowhere near what I need to be able to get married, to give to a girl to marry me and stuff like that. And so eventually you get frustrated, and you just end up quitting the job. I've done a lot of no call, no showing, just because I feel like we're not, the issue, I feel like a lot of the issues with Asperger's kind of are expected to just get masked. For example, you're telling someone with a social disorder that social skills training is not medically necessary. For us, that's kind of a big deal. That's kind of the disorder. And you're saying it's not medically necessary. And so, and there's a lot of people with Asperger's coming out saying they feel even mental counseling is kind of you're being ghosted. And we're talking about how we feel we're presenting these issues I want to talk to girls. I want to learn how to talk to girls. And it makes me feel like I want to self-harm, that I don't know how to talk to girls. And so we're taking that Asperger's issue, and now the counselor is turning it into a mental health issue. And so we turn a lot of Aspie issues into mental health issues. And the danger in that is if it truly is just an Asperger's issue, and you've diagnosed,
like I've been diagnosed with bipolar and schizoaffective because I wanted to learn how to talk to girls and like stuff like that. And so when you diagnose those things and you start prescribing antipsychotics and antidepressants, if it's truly just there's two types of depression, right? There's situational depression and there's like a chemical imbalance. But if it's like Asperger, like situational depression, and there is no chemical imbalance, and you start playing with chemicals, you can actually create a chemical imbalance and make things worse. And so like I would go to counseling and I would tell them my story and kind of be desperate about wanting to talk to girls and stuff like that, and wanting to date. And, you know, I was getting told that there's something else to it. There's something more wrong with you than Asperger's, because we don't typically see this in Asperger syndrome. And what was happening, I think, is they don't typically see someone with Asperger who develops a special interest in that topic or that issue. And so I think, you know, they were trying to, like, when I say mask it, they were trying to, like, turn it into something else, something more than what it was. So, like, they started diagnosing things. They would keep saying, like, they even went as far as to, like, be like, you know, you present symptoms of someone who's been sexually abused as a child growing up, and like they started spoon feeding me ideas, right? And so then you like imagine going home, like, you know, it's never happened, but going home and like wondering to yourself, did my parents do anything to me? You know, like just because we don't want to realize that sexuality is a part of Asperger syndrome, and things like that. And so like one of the things that happened was I had seen so many counselors who had been like, you know, well, I think it's something else. I think it's something more severe wrong with you. And like eventually I started like Googling things and convincing myself that there was other things wrong with me. And I had somehow like I really started to get psychosis, and I convinced myself that I had cancer. I had like thyroid cancer, and you know I actually tried to cut my thyroid out, and I was telling people I had thyroid cancer and things like that, and it got really pretty intense, and that didn't work. And then like I started like it just like went to self-harm. Like, okay, if you're not going to listen, then I'm going to self-harm. Like, and so it got to that. And again, nothing really seems to. It's like there's this roadblock. Like they're not going to change their mind. You know, no matter what. I could like jump off of a parking garage, and you know they're not going to change their mind. And so like now it's just like I really, and I want to talk a little bit about there's two types. Okay, like. This is just my experience with it, and everyone's different. But there's two types of behavior analysis, in my opinion. Like there's true ABA, and then like but I really feel like, this is my opinion, through the waiver, the behavior consulting you get sometimes through the waivers isn't really true ABA. And like I literally was having like emailing these people, right? So I'm emailing these people, and like my behavioral consultant's getting frustrated, so he all of a sudden the owner of his company, of his behavioral consulting company, like sends me a text message, and you know, you're emailing all these people, and he's like, you need to stop with your behavior right now, or I'm going to file an incident report with the state on your behavior. Like, and I'm thinking to myself, like, dude, aren't you the one that's kind of supposed to be working on the behavior, you know, like that type of thing, and it's just stuff like that, and so.
What's your understanding of ABA? Like, what is good ABA?
I mean, to me, it's very, like, I'm very big on natural environment teaching. Context, like Peter sold me on context is king. Like, he sold me on that. And there's a ton of, like, content in what Peter talks about, Peter Gerhardt, where he talks about, like, for example, he tells a story. He's actually speaking, and if you've seen the video, he's speaking in Australia. And he's telling a story about how he gets into like coin identification a little bit and skills like that. And he's like, we knock it into the ground. But you know what? When's the last time, like I go to McDonald's and I order 2 large Cokes and it's $2.14. I give them $3. They hand me change. Do you know how often I actually count the change that they hand me? And so like I take it and I throw it into the middle console. And like one of the things that I really got fixated on was when Peter said the quote of, there is no girl sitting in a bar somewhere that will not go home with the guy because he does not know how to identify coins. And so we're talking about executive functioning versus social thinking. And I think we have to start looking at like what skills do have social value versus what skills kind of aren't really as important anymore. Or I mean, they're important, but they're not like do or die like skills. And I think the difference to me between good ABA and bad ABA is a good behavior analyst, a good BCBA, cares about the reason for the behavior. They're not just like, okay, what you're doing is terrible. We're going to stop what you're doing at no cost, you know? Like, because I think if you if you think of ABA as, obviously we know that ABA doesn't always have the best reputation with adults on the spectrum, but if you think of ABA more of as skills acquisition training versus like behavior reduction, we're going to get rid of your behavior and we're not going to do anything to help you meet the need. We're just going to get rid of the behavior. And if we're doing it that way, then we're doing it wrong. Because to me, the goal and the concept is we're going to teach you a skill that's going to make it so you don't need access to that behavior anymore. But like not everyone gets that.
Yeah.
And you know, we talk a lot about academia and principles. And I think like it's great. It's great to have rules, but we've got to realize, like, just like we teach people with autism, just like we teach socially, we have to generalize and apply. So even those rules, we have to have flexibility to generalize and apply those rules so that we can make it person-centered, you know, for the person that we're working with.
Yeah.
And if we stay stuck on this is what we should do because this is what this textbook says we should do, or you've got a kid with autism who's got a behavior problem and you're saying, this is what I think Skinner would do, you know, like, I mean, it's okay to do that, but if we're not able to generalize and apply it to the person, like we're kind of failing. And Peter, like in the video you actually did with Peter, is very good, where he talks about like the client, the person, like he said, the rat is always right. Mm-hmm. I'd like to think that the Aspie is always right, you know. And so like literally, I feel frustrated because I feel like I'm leading people, like I'm leading the state to this right intervention, like social skills training. I need social skills training. I'm leading them there, but they're not willing to follow.
Yeah.
And so I feel trapped. Mm-hmm. And I feel stuck because I know that was helpful, and I just know even from a mental health standpoint, even if you're like, say you're working on social skills but you're still not getting a girlfriend, but the fact that you're actually working on social skills and you're working on the context of the issue makes you feel so much better mentally, just to know that you're working on it and you're not masking the issue.
Yeah.
And so I think we really, from a service standpoint, not just behavior analysis, but from a service standpoint in general, we really do have to value more the opinions of people on the spectrum and what we're doing. And especially when you've got someone who's able to communicate their need. We kind of need to listen to that. You know, it's frustrating to be verbal and be able to ask for what you need, but to just be like, I mean, people haven't actually literally done this, but it feels like they're laughing at you when you ask for like a dating coach or like a social skills coach. It feels like we're just laughing in your face. Like, why would you want that? You know?
So you said there was a few last things.
Two things that I'd kind of like to, you know, it's very important for me to be who I am, be authentic, and put myself out there. So, and we can edit this, but like one of the things that maybe I'll get your opinion on if we should release it or not. But one thing is I think one of the issues that I feel like has caused me the most comorbid issues is the fact that I'm so high functioning that I can go out there and research, and I can find people like you, and I can find people like Peter and Michelle Garcia Winner, big names within the fields of behavior analysis.
Mm-hmm. Sorry.
That's all right.
Sometimes the camera's there.
Yeah.
So you can find these people.
I can find all these resources within the field of behavior analysis. And then what happens is I come back to the table with my staff. And I say, well, this is what the leaders in the field are doing. Mm-hmm. And so I'm trying to get my staff to do, like I'm trying to get my behavioral consultant who's just a BC. And there's nothing wrong with that, but just a BC, no other credential. And I'm trying to get them to do what Peter's talking about, what Peter's doing.
Yeah.
And sometimes like my staff feels like offended because I feel like I feel like they don't know what they're doing. Like, and so I think that's kind of created some comorbid issues for me, is I'm able to see this product that like Peter and Michelle are putting out, but then the product I'm getting from the services isn't necessarily at that level. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of created some issues. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about is that, you know, I really do struggle with, I want it to be known that what I'm asking for in services are replacement skills, replacement behaviors. So one example is I would like to have a replacement behavior for sending a dozen roses as a way of connecting. What happened for me was, because I didn't know how to emotionally connect, I started seeing gifts as a form of connection. Mm-hmm. And so like, but the problem is if you never talk to the girl and you send her a dozen roses and you find out where she works and you send her a dozen roses, it's creepy.
Yeah.
So I'm asking for a replacement behavior for that. I'm also asking for a replacement behavior for paying girls to hang out with me. And the important thing is with sexuality, I'm asking for, Peter talks about step 1 through 787. Hi, my name is Travis. Can I feel your breasts? I'm asking for the steps. I'm asking for the gray area. I'm pleading, I'm begging for help with the gray area, because right now I feel like I have 2 choices. I can sit stagnant and not approach girls at all and not talk to them at all, or I can say, hi, my name is Travis, I really like you, can we make out or can we go on a date? And I feel paralyzed with talking to girls.
Yeah.
And so I'm pleading for replacement behaviors.